And a top of the morning to you all, and a warm welcome to this third and final day of the 2021 Translating Europe Forum. I can't believe it's already at this point. The time has rushed by. For people who've been following over the past couple of days, I hope you found the sessions fruitful and stimulating. And for those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, don't worry, you can catch up on the discussions you've missed. The session recordings are available on this platform and on the Translating Europe YouTube channel. Just search for the hashtag 2021TEF for the links to take you directly there. And of course, you can use it to share your thoughts on what you hear today as well. For those of you who haven't seen me before, my name is Aminda Lee. I'm a journalist, I'm a translator, and I'm also a moderator. I'm based in Rome, and today's weather report is a bit of blue sky, but mainly clouds. I'm going to start off the day today by opening our usual poll to get you into the TAF swing. And since it's Friday, the question today is, what are your weekend plans? And you have various options. They are relax, family, party, sport, or work. Oh, I hope we don't see many of those work, but then again, I do know that the work of the translator often happens over the weekends as well. So I'm going to leave that poll open for the moment. To access the poll, just click on the questions polls tab on the right-hand side of your session screen. And I'm going to leave the poll open to give you all a chance to reply. I see we've already got quite a few replies coming in, and relax seems to be the winning one so far. We'll have a look at the final results in a few moments. While it's running, just a reminder to make the most of the one-to-one meeting opportunities available. As our inspiring keynote speaker, Anna Schegel, said yesterday, you should never stop networking. So do check out the profiles the platform's AI has found for you, and you can find them all via the People tab on the left-hand side menu of your screen. And do also try and make time to visit the virtual exhibition booths and even hook up with their representatives who are available for a chat. You can access them via the exhibition tab in the menu on the left. Now, we've been trying to give you a bit of an overview of who's tuning in and what you're all doing on the platform. So we know that 120 people attended the networking breakouts yesterday. We've had 890 meeting requests and 229 meetings accepted, and a bit of a lag there. Do remember to accept the invitations that people have sent you. You can find them via the notifications bell on the top right-hand side of your screen. And we've also had almost 3,500 chat messages exchanged, which is quite impressive. You're obviously trying to share a lot of information there. As you know, we have a lot of participants, over 2,000, in fact, I think almost 3,000 now, who've registered on the platform, and they're representing 5 continents. Just a list of a few exotic countries that are being represented by participants who are tuning in, from Azerbaijan, from Cameroon, Colombia, Guadeloupe, Jamaica, Vietnam, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. So welcome to you all. Thank you for tuning in, probably at very difficult times of the day for you, given that you're all over the world. So I'd like to now lock the Slido poll and let's see the results of what you're going to be doing over the weekend. So the majority of people, 47%, but only just, are going to have total relax. We have 45% who are going to spend time with family, which can be relaxing or not, depending on the age of your family and what they want to do. Unfortunately, we have 19% of people who will be working over this weekend. 15% of you are very sporty and will be looking after your fitness. And we have 11% who will be partying. I must say that my answer is relax, because it's been a quite intense few days. Okay, we can now close that poll. Thank you very much indeed. Later on today, we're going to be having a live demonstration of some of the well-known IT tools that are out there in Show Me Your Case. And there'll be discussions on new flexible working environments and what's next in automation for the translation profession. But we'll be telling you more about those later on. But first, we're going to be taken to a higher plane by our keynote speaker, Shivvy Jervis. She's a futurologist who's one of Europe's top 30 women in digital, and she's also been voted as one of Britain's top women of the year for 2021. Joining us from London, welcome Shivvy.
Aminda, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Wonderful. Well, Shivvy's work focuses on technology and its future implications for human beings, and she's especially interested in the human potential. Today, she's going to introduce you to ways you can elevate your potential in a session that also has time for your questions at the end, which please send in and vote on through the usual question polls tab on the right-hand side of your screen. So this morning, Shivvy's going to take us on a journey exploring the science of motivation, tapping into the positive signals showing why AI won't destroy human translation, and introducing you to new jobs you may never have thought about. I'm sure you're as eager as I am to hear more. So without any further delay, I give you Shivvy Jervis.
Thank you so much, Aminda. I will take the baton and continue now. Welcome, I'm Shivvy Jervis, a professional business forecaster. I'm tuning in from London today, and I'm absolutely delighted to be invited by the Directorate General for Translation of the European Commission to speak at this forum. I have no doubt that I'm addressing an extremely talented audience in those of you listening. Whether you're a linguist, you're in management, you're an admin expert, you're working in any capacity in this industry. Now, while my main expertise is digital technologies and innovations that drive our future, the research lab that I created also looks heavily at neuroscience, at how our minds work. And this is so vital when we think about the transformation of any industry, digital or otherwise, because human psychology, our behavior, truly shapes business outcomes. It gives us clues about how people might interact with a particular tool or service, right? It can also help predict if a new product, whatever shape it takes, will gain traction or momentum. And it tells us a lot about economic market signals as well. So I'm actually going to open this session with asking you an intriguing question. I may not be able to hear your answer, but just think in your minds. If I asked you to think of one person with whom you have the most conversations, who might that be? Is it your partner? Is it your children? Is it a boss, a friend? You probably will say one of those, right? Who is the person that you think you have the most dialogue with? But the answer is none of those people. And the answer is actually yourself. So scientific research shows we have up to 6 times more dialogue with ourselves quietly in our minds than we actually do out loud with the people around us. And this is because our neurotransmitters, meaning the chemical messengers that are firing off in your brains, are going so much faster than you might realize, even subconsciously. So what we are all doing, consciously and subconsciously, is taking in and absorbing all the information coming at us, as well as how we're feeling at the time, the mood we're in, how we feel. So those inner dialogues are happening even when you have to take a decision, even when your brains are relaxed. So if you have some of those mini dialogues between now and when I finish this talk, I can tell you I won't take it personally. So that's just one small example of some of the fascinating findings that tell us more about human behavior. You see, I want us to look at how our individual potential can actually be elevated, how we can use the many breakthroughs, innovations, and developments taking place around us, particularly from digital technology, to do this, rather than feel like the advances here and I am here as a human, and the two are just not meeting. And for over a decade, I've been humbled to have been called on by some of the world's most progressive organizations to make sense of what we might expect to see. And I constantly tell people that the future isn't some obtuse scenario that's 10 years from now. I talk often about what you might expect to see 2 weeks from now, 3 months from now, 18 months, 2 years, definitely something more realistic. So this scenario planning for how things might play out for us in terms of how we'll earn, how we learn, how we'll grow our businesses and ultimately thrive is what I want to talk you through. So let's get started now that we're on warmer terms and we've broken the ice, so to speak. By the way, that as a term goes back to the 18th century. Just a little fun fact where they had special ships to break the ice in polar regions. And there's also a more poetic origin to it in the 17th century when a well-known writer called Samuel Butler used it to mean having a more relaxed relationship, to break social formalities. So I hope you feel we've done that now. So what can you expect to hear today? First, we'll start by looking at the mind, the science of motivation. Why do we give up? What does it mean for you at work on your wider lives? And how could you apply this to other people, your colleagues, perhaps people at home? But really, how could you help people stay engaged in what you're offering or what you have to say? Then we look at the innovation aspect. We'll explore 3 signals, 3 significant signs in an AI age that means machines won't displace humans in the way that you might fear. You know, I want to alleviate the red flags that you may have against the use of technology in your industry and the worries you have, which I completely understand, of whether it will displace you or enhance your future. And finally, we look at the most fascinating jobs of the future that are going to help drive us forward. This includes the role of a digital ethicist. So you'll want to hear what that's about. And we'll look also at some of the skills that will get us there. Right, now let's look at what we like to call the science of motivation, or the science behind why we give up. Please, may I have the first slide come on? Fantastic. So you see, in relation to our jobs, our projects, our home lives, anything can arise, but 2 situations come in. One is you lose all motivation in a serious way, you abandon something completely. Now, this could be a customer canceling their contract with you. It could be an employee leaving their job, someone leaving a relationship, sadly. That's just gone right to the end, and it's hard to do anything about that. But the second is the one that happens more often, the smaller ways in which we all pull back. We stall, we hesitate, sometimes we're frozen with indecision. Our motivation really is absolutely flagging. This is actually far more common, and it can happen a number of times in a number of ways every day, every week. So this loss of incentive is what I've been studying. So in that moment when we disengage, what actually happens physiologically in your bodies when you lose motivation? So let me just give you a quick walkthrough of that. There is a molecule that's given out at the point where your brain is about to switch off from something and you've just lost your motivation for it. This molecule actually pushes down or suppresses dopamine. And dopamine, many of you may know, it's the chemical that's frequently associated with our drive, our motivation. These dopamine suppressing neurons sit in our brain's reward and motivation center, and they are found to become very, very active just before we reach our breaking point where we decide we're going to take our attention elsewhere. So what can we do about this when it comes to keeping ourselves and the people around us tuned into our business? Let's just look at 2 approaches in the interest of time. So let's see slide 2, please. First and foremost, it is absolutely vital never to underestimate the foundational level importance that the concept of fairness, of equity, has to do with engaging people. Now, you may think this sounds logical. This is something that's happening all the time in companies, isn't it? Surely everyone knows that other people should be treated fairly in terms of how we treat our employees, our customers. But actually, it turns out it's in short supply. In our analysis of over 45 credible studies over the last 10 years from world-class institutes, we've deduced that only approximately 4 out of 10 employees appear treated by an employer at any given time. So examples of this might be experiencing nepotism, appraisals not recognizing outputs on a merit basis, office politics, or being undermined in front of a team member. These are very, very common reasons. And then dynamics. I mean, that's huge, right? The consumer can feel that they just don't have enough influence or a voice in the outcome of a dealing or a transaction. This leads to the feeling of inequity or a very unfair balance of control. And so they can mentally check out, and you lose that opportunity for meaningful interaction. So what you can do here is actually create a vision for the other side, to bring about discovery, to bring about that decision-making on their part, to get them to feel more invested because you're investing in them. Do you realize how sometimes we call certain leaders visionary? What distinguishes a manager or a leader who is visionary from someone that we don't think of in that way? They do this, they create a vision for the other person to buy into. And also when you're interacting with a client or colleague, helping that person feel that they actually have a say in the outcome. They have a role to play in shaping the outcome, the negotiation, the conversation, the interaction you're having, rather than one side having more power, starts to trigger the brain that, all right, this is a more equal setup. The dynamic is not skewed to one person, and they stay much more engaged. And my next tip is that it is scientifically proven that, contrary to what you and I might have assumed about rationality, objectivity, or logic, the human brain has other plans. It's been shown that we don't think our way to logic. We actually feel our way through to reason. And what I mean by that is that the connection between logic and our emotion centers is far closer than you even might think. So even when you think you're making a logical decision or thinking in an objective way, actually you're calling on the emotion center. And what happens is the word emotion gets a bit of a bad reputation, right? We try to think, oh, emotion doesn't have a role in the workplace, because we link emotion with this negative association of someone being out of control or hyper or, in hysterics. We think of emotion as a feeling thing, and, at work, you've got to take it out of it, be logical. And yet, to understand this connection between logic and our emotion centers, a well-known scientist called Antonio Damasio, he studied people with damage to the areas of their brain that are actually responsible for emotion. And to everyone's surprise but his, he found that those with damaged emotion centers actually had huge trouble making even the simplest of decisions, even those as small as, which color pen should I pick up from the table? What do I eat first off this plate full of food? Even those fundamental things, when someone had a damaged emotion center, they had lots of trouble making objective, rational decisions. So remember, when you're influencing someone to make decisions one way or another during any kind of interaction, any kind of negotiation, an employment situation, when you're building your business and trying to bring clients in, it's not enough to use reason or logic alone. You can fill someone's mind to the brim with statistical information and facts, but what you have to do is bring about a feeling state. You sometimes hear people say, well, why should I care? In a work scenario, that's exactly what we're talking about, is that you've got to answer the so what question for a client, a stakeholder, or colleague. And so these are 2 tips. I've got about 7 principles, but in the interest of time, I wanted to window into the neuroscience world, and I thought I would talk you through what some of these developments from neuroscience can do for us. Right, so next, let's kind of shift topics a little bit and look at the world of digital advances. Now, perhaps many of you are independent freelancers and you work for yourself like I do, or you're with a company, small, medium, or large, or from academia or an institute that, but some universities and colleges that are keeping us up at night, right? We truly do. Now, for one, how are we going to maintain our livelihood? How are we going to keep the work in? How are we going to maintain a secure financial for our families and ourselves? And this is where a lot of people that I speak to go up against that fear on a daily basis, all right? And that challenge of wondering, is automation going to benefit us? Is it going to augment things? How is it going to keep me safe? So I want to examine this. I'm going to put it to the test. Is it that, or actually is it going to enhance the security or and augment what I'm doing? So what I want to do is I want to give you positive signs and signals for why this future is far more reassuring than you might think. Now, I don't blame you, because the news headlines are quite sensationalist. We hear the robots are coming, when in fact it's not a 6'2" robot running into the office or wherever you work from, edging you out of your job. Yes, we think about software as something that could threaten professions that have some element of automation, but AI is not new. It's been in play for decades now. Okay, it's been used in many different contexts, right? From your automation software in call centers, which by the way have stayed in business and done really well. Even on industrial shop floors, it hasn't completely displaced people. People are working more closely alongside it. And the fourth industrial revolution that we are more than halfway through now, and the World Economic Forum backs up that timeline, actually has for the first time a big advantage over previous industrial revolutions, because it focuses on that bridge and that gap between man and software, or man and machine. So if you're anything like me, much more something with a bit of evidence, a bit of proof, a bit of show and tell. Now, while I can't take us into a time warp into the future and show you what's happening there, because let's face it, none of us have that capacity, what I can show you is some realistic and reassuring findings from my work, some signals that indicate to us why machines won't displace humans in the way that many news articles might indicate. So please bring next slide. One, I'm going to show you all these signals one by one, right? For one, it is a hard fact that AI or automation software is simply not capable of certain specific traits that an actual person can do. It does not have human consciousness. It does not understand all our human contexts, the situational context for different things. The smallest changes in how we say something, which can alter the meaning of a statement, right? You can have the same statement said in 3 different ways. One can sound sarcastic, one can sound very intense and aggravated, and another can sound completely neutral. Now, Siri and Alexa don't quite get this. So a lot of these systems don't have, well, none of them have intuition, none of them have empathy. They can't persuade or convince someone in a way that the person might do. So, and while we all know people with a questionable sense of maybe ethics or morality, and certainly human judgment itself can be very flawed or subjective, enough situations have made it clear, one more point as well, that AI on its own, unregulated by a person, is not able to grasp the questions that we absolutely must need to embed in our digital tools, in our everyday lives. The questions of ethics, or what is morally acceptable. How can we make sure we don't breach the data privacy of an individual? How do we make sure that all the behaviors of an organization or a particular product or service or the people within it respects the integrity of the end user? And many of you may remember a particular tech giant, I won't name names, the disaster they had with the bot just 4 years ago, when they put an automated bot out on social media as though it had its own profile, not a person, but you know, they had an avatar for it. And that was based on machine learning. It ended up becoming racist and saying really hateful things because it was, on a clinical level, technically it was absorbing and responding to what people were saying to it. And people were obviously trying to mock it and trick the system by actually feeding it hateful dialogue. But it didn't obviously have any human oversight, and he got into a lot of trouble for that. So there was a real repercussion from that on reputation. or the cases you may have heard of HR or hiring systems on software that have actually displayed bias against candidates because the algorithm was flawed. It carried bias or prejudice, and it pulled up profiles or CVs of people that were perhaps not suitable, and it actually pushed away ones that actually could have been suitable, but it ruled it out on the basis of a technicality. So you've got to have that human oversight. All these examples have serious repercussions. They need human judgment. We've still got cases happening as we speak of surveillance software being used in what we call predictive policing, right? So used in the police force, where these systems are actually identifying suspects wrongly because the software is profiling certain ethnicities as crime offenders when they didn't necessarily do anything wrong. So it's recognized by tech companies and governments or regulatory bodies that human oversight is necessary. And we've got to put controls in place which protect the role of the human more. And the good news is this is happening. And that's why, that's my first signal. Right, let's bring on the next slide, please. The next reassuring signal is that we often think of AI as a threat in terms of positioning ourselves as unable to do anything about it, that our role as a human is somehow passive, that all of this is happening without any control on our end. But this is just not true. Where I see people actually turning the value of AI to their human advantage is where they are able to use AI tools to enhance their outputs and not necessarily displace them from the business. And sectors that have managed to turn this around are actually taking AI and turning it into their advantage. And you can do this as well. So this will give those kind of people in that sector a very good chance of not actually even just keeping their business going or surviving, but growing with the use of AI. So whether you're a linguist, whether you're an admin expert, whether you're working in any sort of role in the translation sector, you own the business, or, for instance, you're in management, many of you are going to be involved in extremely complex, time-consuming activities. You're having to comb through hundreds of pages of transcripts. You're translating policy papers, laws, reports, pardon me, dialogue. You're trying to ensure that the translated outputs are as accurate to their originals, whatever the original is. So this now means, in addition to being a linguistic expert, you're a knowledge worker, as we all are. You're having to make sense of thousands of words and phrases and information, right? And a good example of this is in medicine, where each day hundreds of thousands of researchers, medical experts, and scientists are having to make sense of vast amounts of data in order to find cures or drugs to tackle really, really significant health conditions. So when this industry decided that AI could be a threat, what they did instead is when these deep learning machines and high-tech AI tools came out, the medical research industry were definitely in a state of panic, because this to make, extrapolations from thousands of pages of information 70% faster than a human, right? But this sector realized, despite apprehension, the role of the researcher, the drug discovery expert, the scientist was not dead. It wasn't the case. They ended up adapting an asset to enhance their outputs by using it alongside their work, speed up the process of finding. But the human still had a very critical role to play. And indeed, it's actually made many of those organizations, the research centers, the institutes, even more profitable, because they're able to operate at speed, and that speed hasn't displaced people. It's allowed people to stay in the equation. So please do bear in mind that AI can take away some of the most tedious aspects of your job, and it can free you up to actually focus on the more important things. Right, let's see the next slide, please, for the third signal. And my third signal is actually about an area I'm invited to speak about weekly. hundreds of summits and events over the past 5 years. And this is about the evolution of AI. Where is it headed? Because in order to have reassuring signs and signals about why AI is not necessarily a threat in the way we think, we can't ignore looking at where it's what evolution of it. Why could that evolution be a really good sign for you? So there is a movement taking place, let me tell you, with something that many other futurists and I have observed. It's not just me alone. And my lab and I have called this adaptive AI, meaning it is designed to suit the needs of the user that is specifically based on what that user is looking for. Instead of one big solution that's meant to fit everyone that isn't personalized to the individual. And it is able to respond to the needs of the person by being able to understand a little more context, the inflections and intonations in language, the nuances of dialogue, just to be a little more helpful, taking it from level 2.5, our voice assistants, our AI software, our data dashboards, our business intelligence platforms. These are all based on adaptive AI more and more finally. So this is about keeping people at the core of it without losing the human touch. Now, I have lots of examples from other industries, but I thought I would actually give you some more specific examples that are for the translation industry. So I've been looking at many platforms or tools powered by AI that have the adaptive AI system, and they're keeping humans in the loop. They would enable the person to actually take on more work. And certainly those of you that are translators have the capacity then to use these tools and actually earn more, because the data tool is simply automating the elements that you don't need to be spending precious man hours on. Now, I'm going to not mention any company names in terms of some of these tools, but if I do mention one, let me just say I have no commercial connection to any of these. So you've got a platform, many of these actually, that seek to do what we call working just ahead of the human. So what that means is it's predictive. It makes predictions for the translated content. And the translator then works with the built-in AI or the deep learning neural networks, if you want to get technical, for each segment of the text that needs translation and corrects what the software has what Word document. And then obviously you go back and look at it, most of us do, and you make amendments because there are certain things you think, oh my gosh, look at that type, this is wrong, or no, that's not what I said. So it is the same principle on just a higher level. And there's a tool called Lengoo, Lengoo, there's a tool called Lilt, Lilt. They do this really, really well. They're quite best in class here. Another type of tool to show you with this AI signal is the type that want to support linguists by streamlining and automating content workflows so that it helps to translate. Then there's translation software that still requires native speakers of the language to help with the item being translated, to review and refine the machine translations and put back in the things I spoke about in point 1, empathy, context, meaning, cultural nuances, right? A lot of software doesn't do cultural contexts. So let me tell you that adaptive AI is truly becoming a focus for many of the biggest tech giants and some of the best and brightest startups that are trying to produce the software that some of you might worry is a threat, because it's actually in the best interest of these companies and software for the user, for the buyer, which is someone like you, to know that when you sign for it, or when a customer goes online to look for a cheap translation software, that they're not going to receive the whole proper service. They're not going to receive a quality output without a person's involvement in it. So it's in the benefit as well from a profitability perspective for these companies to do this. So I hope that some of these signals have reassured you a little bit. Right. Let's look at the third segment of this talk, when we think of a hopeful, connected future, let's look at the next slide that will tell us some of the traits, some of the pivotal skills that we will need to be aware of, including what we call soft skills that will prepare us to actually stay future ready. Now, when we talk of the abilities that we want to keep in our tool belts, let's focus on some specific skills and look at digital first. Now, most of these will be self-explanatory to you while you're reading this on your screen. So I'm going to touch on 3 of them in the interest of time. For one, we will need to make extrapolations and judgments from the patterns that our data science systems or dashboards are already doing, applying that human inference that I've already displayed in the last segment. But I also think we'll need to see and recognize that there's going to be a surge in the demand for knowledge of edge computing. This is going to be significantly valued. It's bringing cloud services closer to where it's actually needed. But apart from having some knowledge of data tools, apart from having expertise in edge computing or anything else on that slide, you will also notice that I put in there forecasting. So why? It's not because I'm a futurist, but because thinking like a scenario planner can help tremendously. What we can do here is plan on non-linear timelines. We can help build digital ecosystems that can go the distance. We can learn to have the ability within our organizations of how to course correct more rapidly because we anticipated a particular scenario. And a good way to think of this is a combination of 2 types of functions. So let's imagine that you are in your home and you have a structural engineer, okay? A structural engineer who comes to object. Maybe you're having a revision done, we just did months ago, and objectively evaluate project. Their role is to say, hey, have you thought about X or Y or such thing? Have you thought about keeping a lookout for a supporting beam that's could cause a problem? Or have you noticed an issue here where right now it might be okay, but in 6 months it could be a problem? And then to that, imagine you add the role of an architect who actually takes further. The architect walks in and thinks, right, I'm going to create a vision for which to look like when it's, what does good look like for this renovation? And this person is also staying true to the principles, of course, of what the structural engineer has advised that is actually possible. It's this potent combination, which is what a forecaster is called on to do. And developing this capability in-house will be absolutely vital for organizations. Now, another area I believe we want to learn something about is digital ethics. Some of you may think, oh, ethics sounds a bit philosophical. You know, is ethics just so subjective that it's really hard to do? And yet all our digital innovations are built by people. They are not infallible. They do carry bias. How can our apps use sensitive information in a way that doesn't breach a moral code of conduct, your privacy, your integrity as a user? What are the ethical implications of certain applications? When a semi-autonomous car hurts someone, where does the onus lie? We've got hundreds of ethical dilemmas that are going to continue to arise from digital and technological innovation. So we absolutely need more talent to be well-versed in this. But let me tell you, this isn't just about one role. This isn't just about a chief digital ethicist. Actually, it's not even just for the coders. Now I'm seeing more and more organizations thinking about getting many members of their workforce, such as those of you watching, even marketing teams, even business development, well-versed in this, because it goes towards that collective goal. I think we're at the start of something here that's going to be really big. Right, so what about jobs, given this is on many of our minds? So let's look at the next slide, please. What I'm touching upon, sorry, we can skip that slide. What I'll touch upon now is not necessarily everyday jobs. I'm going to show you some of the more fascinating roles that will start to become more common. So let's go to the next slide, please. Number of roles in expect demand. I just knew what an ethics expert would do, the notion of digital ethics. Okay, but it's also being integrated by learners looking to graduate with degrees in technical fields, because technologists were not exposed to social sciences in the way that they should be. The next role you can see on there is virtualized medicine or healthcare experts. We are going to need more medics, surgeons, trainee doctors even, who have the ability to deliver more than just a basic consultation over Skype, over Zoom. Rather, now we're going to have the scientific and technological advancements to allow our doctors to virtually scrub in, so to speak, when it comes to advising and remotely taking part in procedures that might even save the life of someone in your family one day. Then we've got alternative energy planners. Now, this may not be something that you pursue directly, but it's really good to know about it nonetheless. The goal of mitigating climate change is universal, and it does impact the sustainability targets of all organizations. So as we transition towards a clean energy future and global supply of fossil fuels starts to run out, alternative energy such as biofuels, geothermal power, tidal energy, hydrogen will become more critical, and we will need the talent and the jobs to help drive this forward. Another role is that of immersive media experts. We will need to create communications material and brand experiences more for mixed media forms within the next year or two. Things like augmented reality, which, let me remind you, is when you hold your phone or your tablet up, you activate the camera, and through that, you can have any digital piece of information, an experience, a video message from a CEO, a product or service being visualized, actually in your real environment, in the sense that you can visualize how this would be in the real world, and it brings things to life. And certainly research shows that this is being used in brand campaigns. It's being used to really allow a user to understand even their finances. I'm seeing a bank roll this out in the UK to work out, how does this product or service really benefit me? And it's even, from the image you're seeing, being used in factories to help people manage or stock an area safely, or to navigate an area just by holding up their phone or tablet over the real world. Right, so as we start to come to a close, last 7 or 8 minutes, let me just say that the past 2 years have been absolutely turbulent for many of us, right? But in business, whilst there has been a great deal of loss as well, companies have been hit hard. There have also been some hidden opportunities that have emerged as well. Let's bring on the next slide, please. So for me, this is what I think of as surprising opportunities from a setup that is really, really, really quite turbulent. So for one, recent events have actually allowed us to weed out, to remove processes or systems that were actually holding us back, that were bureaucratic, that were full of red tape. In fact, a study showed that pre-COVID, it took a medium to large sized organization an average of upwards of 16, that's 16 meetings, to arrive at a key business decision. That's a lot, right? But just 1 year into the pandemic, this figure went down to 8. The hope is that many of these more realistic and efficient changes should continue post-2021. Next, I see a rise of what my lab and I have called the moral economy. What do I even mean by that? Organizations, individuals, and governments are going through, as a result of the pandemic, a refresh, an update of their values. They're having to be forced by the situation, by the pressure from the crisis, to almost reevaluate, hey, what do I stand for? What does my organization stand for? What is the wider role of my organization in the communities in which we operate? What are those responsibilities that are to our internal workforce? Absolutely, first and foremost, but also to wider society and to citizens. And the rise of this moral economy means that initiatives that previously we said were CSR or corporate social responsibility aren't actually necessarily just seen as a nice to do, or you know what, that's good for the reputation of the company, let's do it to get some publicity. You know, there are companies that do that. Now organizations are realizing they've not just got to put their money where their mouth is, there's got to be a very meaningful view into making the benefits that they enjoy in their company available to citizens, to have some sort of system of paying it forward. And finally, for too long, what you and I know of as digital transformation has been seen very much as an IT challenge. It's been seen very much as something just for the CTO, the head of technology, for the IT team, for his or her team. This is very damaging because digital transformation is far more a people and a mindset shift than an IT issue. And by recognizing this, we have a chance to create fewer innovation hype cycles, meaning technologies that come in, but they sizzle and then they fizzle out, or they come in and they aren't actually adopted by the wider organization. But when you start to blueprint it together with others, when you give different departments a seat at that table to encourage the healthy digital transformation and experimentation, you really see the benefits. Now, I truly hope you've taken away some clear insights from this session. As a recap, from what you can see of the slide, we looked at brain chemistry. We looked at how we can help others and ourselves stay motivated and stay engaged at a time when someone is disengaging. We examined 3 practical, robust, realistic signals backed up by fact that reassure us as to why AI doesn't need to be as big a threat to the translation industry as you might think. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not going to have some impact on jobs, but simply that this doesn't need to result in a wide-scale decimation of roles and the industry. So we can make it work for us. And finally, we did a walkthrough with relevant jobs and skills about being a futurist. And I explained earlier how you can think of one. But there's also something I tell people often in my talks, and I call it the inventor mindset. You see, I've had the luxury of pre-COVID traveling a lot across the world, 4 or 5 times a month. And I don't just go to the big organizations. I also go to the smaller startup incubators or meet individuals who are working under the radar. I call them basement founders. These are some incredibly talented men and women. They could be 22, they could be 52. And they are working on developments in the digital world, in the scientific world, that truly could have such an amazing impact on all of us. But there are some traits that inventors such as them actually have that I think you and I, in the more wider setup, in the more corporate industries, certainly even those of us working for ourselves, can emulate the inventor mindset, we call it. A tip as I start to round this up is to suspend your long-held beliefs about things like leadership, about things like ways of working. And the pandemic has forced us to suspend all our beliefs about ways of working, right? To unlock parts to crucial elements that often hold us back. One, to recognize which of my approaches have been uncontested. I've not ever questioned them. So maybe they're not still true in the current digital economy, in the current wider economy. And the second is, where could my thinking or my organization's thinking do with the refresh? So suspending your assumptions. And in that comes a lot of great stuff. I do this a lot in masterclasses. The other thing you can do as well is don't kill the experimentation. You know, during a difficult time, it can be tempting to steer away from trialing new tools. This is a grave error. It is precisely the time at which your organization needs it the most. I have seen digital experimentation open up real revenue lines, new business lines for organizations that were really suffering. And the research from my lab, Futurescape 248, suggests that those organizations that maintain a healthy innovation risk appetite during turbulent times can actually stand to benefit from 2 to 3 times higher revenue in the next 5 to 10 years compared to the peers that panic and they splash all the digital innovation and experimentation. So above all else, what do we talk about today? We spoke about being future ready. It's really easy for us to say, be future ready, but I want you to feel future ready. It isn't just a list of 5 things that you have on your tip sheet. It's also how you are feeling about it. I do believe there is hope to be found in examples of collaboration that you and I are already seeing, and those to come. We have innovators attempting to design the future, as we say. It's no longer naive or unfounded to say we can use some of these developments for greater impact. And my final call to action, if I had one thing to say to you, is that it is possible to stay realistic and grounded about the now, what we're going through, and the next, what's about to come, without having a doomsday outlook. To have a more balanced view means you can keep optimism in the picture. We can focus on what is working, what will work, how can we gain momentum with that, rather than really being bogged down by a lot of the negative aspects and the sensationalist headlines that you and I see day in and day out. I am Shivvy Jervis. Thank you so much for listening today. And we were exactly 45 minutes. My timer has counted me down, and I want to respect everyone's time and move on to the Q&A. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Shivvy. Wow, well, that was really quite mind-blowing aspects there, a lot to unpick, a lot to absorb. But I certainly feel a bit more future ready after listening to your talk. Now, I have loads of questions myself, but the audience also has questions, and they have precedence. So we'll have a look and see the most voted question first. And at the moment we have, I think people were listening to you so much, they've not been sending in a lot.
Just to say, for me, sorry, just to say that the audio output is breaking up, so you're working up for me. I don't know about everyone listening, so I'll try really blank. If you could repeat the question, that would be great, because it's the audio is a little bit odd.
Yes, I was going to say apologies for the bandwidth problems from London. Obviously, technology is not perfect, and so we apologize for that. And this is why it's better if we can switch off Shivvy's video, and that's why we did that a little bit during the presentation, to preserve some of her bandwidth so you can hear her. So I'll read out the first question, and it is, how do you suggest we start conversations about data ethics in our industry? What do we need to be saying, and to whom? That's had 10 votes.
Wow, that's an excellent question. Yeah, absolutely. Starting a conversation with someone about data ethics is extremely interesting for a number of reasons. For one, people associate ethics with something philosophical rather than tangible, when in fact it is extremely tangible, more than we even realize. Ignoring building in ethics and data integrity into our products and services can really cause big ramifications reputationally, legally, financially, and it can shape the public perception of an organization. So I actually find the best way to start the conversation is make it very relatable, to explain to the person that you're addressing. And one way to do this is perhaps start with a what if scenario that really drives it home for them in their relatable situations. So to say, for example, if there had been no consideration to the moral integrity or ethics from a company, and you were the user, you were the person on the receiving end as a user of a service that didn't factor in the ethical use of data, what could that look like? And how would you feel about that? So I think one great thing to do is give people really good examples. And one example there, Aminda, is there was a case in the US of a man who rushed out of a burning building in Ohio. And he made a statement of claim to an insurance company and the police that he didn't start the fire. He was in fact very, very panicked, and he managed to rush out. They then got his pacemaker data. This man wore a pacemaker. Without his permission, they seized information about his pacemaker data, information that's so private, right, about your heart rhythm, your biology, and they use it against him to say, look, these readings don't show that you were panicked. They don't show that you had a raised heartbeat, an accelerated sense of panic. And we actually wonder if this fire was intentional. I mean, this was a breach of ethics. Without controls in place to prevent that, what if you were in that situation? You would not want your digital identity or your innermost, most private details to be effectively used in an unethical way by any organization. So when you make it really clear to the user or the consumer, that's when I think the penny drops and it becomes much clearer to them why we need data ethics in place and how the absence of it could jeopardize the reputation of an organization and cause that loss. So demonstrating ethics is not optional, it's essential, and really saying that, hey, if you were the end user, you were the client, the stakeholder, the customer of your organization, how comfortable would you feel if that service didn't take into account the protection of your identity or sensitive information to do with you or your work or your business? So approaching that person in conversation about this. And in terms of who to speak to about this, Aminda, it actually isn't just the technical department or the IT team. And something I said in my talk was we've got to actually see ethics as something that we see as a training module for people across the organization. So this could be, the person who develops apps, sure, within the organization, or the digital person, but it could equally be the person that's in management, looking after business development, the head of public policy. So it's really, the whole point of it is we've got to be able to approach anyone within the organization to say, hey, this isn't just a technical thing. Would you be interested in understanding moral codes of conduct in how we work, in the services we offer? And we start to see a lot of people buy into that because we make it relatable.
Okay, thank you. Some good tips there. And also the fact that we need to have, yes, those conversations at all kinds of levels. Okay, the next top voted question was, do you think that AI will make us more aware of what our humanness means and help become more connected as humans? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I love that. That is actually a little bit philosophical. So I appreciate that question. Some of the examples I gave you with the evolution of AI tools, one thing that's helpful to remember, I suppose, is AI is essentially about lines of algorithm. It's about lines of code. The shape it tends to take is a piece of software. Apps are based on it, our maps. All the apps that we have on our phone that are based on even navigation, they're all AI based. So there's a lot that we don't recognize or realize is AI powered that actually uses it and has been using it for 3 decades, let's say. So one thing I would say is I do believe it will actually bridge that gap between man and machine, but in the sense of you realize almost the limitations of AI as well when you use a platform, a service, a tool. Many times I come away thinking, gosh, you know what? This is why I do prefer calling a customer service line and talking to a person. This is why I do prefer being able to speak to a colleague rather than instructing software to do everything. So the software actually should be put in its place, so to speak, by just automating or refining the real tedium of your role. And that does make us aware, I think, of the human value, that there's so much decision making that if I left it to this software who's never met me or met anyone else, who's, HR software, that's not the same as sitting across from a person, hearing their life story, seeing their body language, hearing from someone why they're so motivated to work with your organization. And if we leave all of that to lines of code and to software, that's extremely damaging. That's stripping the human value out of it. And so actually we've seen a really great almost reversal of values being realized through the more AI you plug into the economy, the more everyday people are realizing how limited it is as well. And yes, it can do these certain things extremely well. Let me grab that and turn that into the benefit. But it actually almost amplifies why it's so important to stay human in a digital world.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. We have the next voted question is from Ellen. Quoting Chris Durbin, who we've been hearing from a few times during this forum, including in the open session. Since translators have long been early adopters of technology, how can we best push back when observers comment on how scared we are? So this is the kind of, let's say, disconnect between actually we're really pioneering, the translation industry is very pioneering, and yet people, the loudest voices are often the ones of the fear of the technology.
I see. Okay. And so my understanding from that, Aminda, is it could be an external stakeholder or a client or someone within the company that's expressing skepticism over the automation or the use of technological tools. And I suppose
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we take it to mean that, I mean, my humble opinion on this is, as soon as you're able to demonstrate or maybe even just articulate to this person who has this fear some of the things that I said, that if we can use these tools to augment what we're doing, actually we aren't suddenly becoming completely digitized and losing the humanity element of it. That by the translation industry being seen as progressive, that's actually a fantastic thing for the business. It will actually go towards the sector only expanding, also because the demographics you see of more and more of the generations that are coming up, right from folks like you and I, Aminda, where we're more perhaps established and midway through our careers, but then also certainly a vast number of people that use these services could very well come from Gen X or Gen Z. And so they're perhaps anything between 16 and even 32 or 35, let's say. Actually, a lot of those folks instantly can't think of a world where the adoption of technology doesn't take place. So I believe it would actually alienate a business from a really big target audience that I believe many of your services do have. From that audience, if you say, well, actually, this must be feared, I think it must be embraced. And yes, it must be used responsibly. So I understand the fear, which is why I try to address that in the signals. But certainly, A, it would go towards alienating, I think, a particular demographic. B, I think actually what it does when you are seen in the translation industry as a pioneer of adopting technology to augment your services, making that really clear. I think the communication aspect of that perhaps falls short sometimes. That could very well be the case why someone internally, someone externally, even a client might say, God, what is all this high-tech software you're using? I don't know about that. I want to go back to the good old days where, it was a person, I knew there was a person doing everything. And we all feel like that. We all call it the good old days because now you think, oh my God, just put your phone down, The screen is so intrusive sometimes. It's almost this barrier sometimes between people. And I think certainly with the pandemic, a lot of people are yearning as well to have a break from this digitization, a bit of a detox of, hey, I wanted to sit in a room with a friend or a colleague, and that feels so much more valued. So I think that is also why perhaps we might have this temporary fear rise, because there's been a complete, overwhelming kind of barrage of technology in our faces, and we can only take so much. And there's a lot of neuroscience research, Aminda, going back to human behavior, that shows that when we're not in a feeling state, when we're not able to really just absorb and take something in, and we feel that something is just coming at us, and software can make you feel like that, then you feel unsettled. And that's probably why there are some of these folks saying to some of the people that have asked these, the person that's asked this question, gosh, enough of the software, enough of the technology. But I think this would actually benefit the translation sector if communicated really well, if it's articulated that, hey, we are still staying human. We are human first, technology later. There's a great communications piece in what's communicated in marketing materials for the organization, and what you say in social media about, hey, why should you be using my translation business or me as a freelancer? And people will respond well to that because of this fear. So I think there is a happy balance to be found, so long as others are able to see that. But I do believe the vast majority of people see it because they know that they can benefit from that. Their job is done faster, but the person is still checking everything. The person is still making sure cultural contexts are in there and things like that.
And as you say, the AI can do the boring bits and it leaves you to use your brain.
Exactly.
We're coming towards the end, but I'd like to have another couple of questions. I think Georgi has sent in something very interesting. Is there proper training for these job opportunities? Do universities fall behind these new trends?
So interestingly, the one role on the jobs graphic that came up there, which was rising the fastest, was digital ethics. And the other one is immersive media. And both these roles are seeing a corresponding surge. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why it comes to the forefront of my research lab is we're like, oh, this is interesting. We're really tracking the market. We're trying to be ahead of it. Wow, we're seeing a rapid rollout, particularly in e-skills. So let's say online learning. So it doesn't have to be a traditional university, even though some of them are. So it could be, providers of digital skilling and learning, especially in the last 2 years. We're saying, wow, this is really rising. We're seeing more and more courses that incorporate AI ethics, digital ethics. Okay, that's one. Oh, preparing content for augmented reality, or how you can use an augmented reality tool to grow your business, bring your business to life. And then we also look at what social platforms, particularly with ones that have a lot more sharing value, whether it's the Instagrams, the TikToks, or Twitter and LinkedIn as well. Suddenly the volume of posts that are mentioning immersive media or mentioning ethics or mentioning remote health, absolutely surging. So there are, I think, there's more than enough critical mass and traction behind those 5 or 6 jobs that I mentioned in terms of training. Oh, I can see my video is stalled again. Oh dear.
Oh gosh, right. we're seeing a great video there.
I know, it's almost as though I'm doing a scary dance move, but okay, we're back.
We've got the artificial intelligence behind the scenes making us do things that we perhaps didn't want to. I'm going to wrap it up now. I'm not going to show the question, but I'd just like to finish off with a question that I think, since we're talking about artificial intelligence, is probably worthwhile finishing on. Someone has said, do you think in the future AI may be able to feel emotions? And if so, won't it be able to work and evolve the same as humans?
How much time do we have, Amanda? Okay, I know we have literally 2 minutes left, so I'm going to try and keep this as succinct. One thing that's really worth anyone on here looking up is the singularity. And the singularity is a concept that says we may be decades away from it, but we will see a future, and I think they claim it's possibly 3 decades from now or something like that in terms of timeline. Don't quote me on that. Is we will see a future in which AI won't just be able to do automation of the tedious stuff that we don't want it to do, we don't want to do, but actually AI could even do emotion, it could do empathy, things like that. And there's the biggest school of thought, those of us that have been studying this, researching this, practicing this for decades, I would say 90% of those of us experts in the field. It's really reassuring because it's the biggest tech giants, this is independent talent like myself and my peers, do believe that actually this is not the case. It isn't achievable, and it's very simple. You cannot program human consciousness into a piece of software. You absolutely cannot. It is just not possible. Now, you can try to say, can we give machines cognition? And that is something I talk about, that adaptive AI systems are attempting to say to a system, hey, could you think more like a human, in the sense that then you understand what the human is asking you better, and you can actually service the human in the way that they really need. So if you ask your voice assistant, a Siri, Alexa, a Google, or if you're on a website and you're using, an e-commerce site, it's a text bot, or using business intelligence software, we all have that moment of, thinking, oh, God, I feel like slamming my head against this computer. It doesn't get me. Like, this is not what I asked. We all feel like that. So that we can do, and that's giving it cognition. That is possible, and that's already happening, because that's saying to it, this is the context, if this, then that. but giving it human consciousness. I mean, I could burst into song right now. I could burst out crying. Okay, a system cannot predict that because it cannot get into my neurology and my physiology to do that. So you can't have a predictive algorithm that does emotion in terms of anticipates this. But Aminda, if you and I were sat face to face, you saw my eyes welling up, you saw me look down, you saw a flicker of emotion across my face. You might say, oh, I'm so sorry. Are you upset? Or you hand me the tissue because you think, oh my gosh, she's about to cry. Machine can't do that. No webcam software can do that. So in terms of anticipating emotion, in terms of doing emotion, it doesn't have consciousness. And hence it cannot actually have intuition or a gut feeling or empathy and the very traits that make us inherently human.
Thank you very much indeed, Shivvy. I'm sure we could talk for hours, but unfortunately our time is now up. I'm sorry to all of those of you who still have questions, but it's been absolutely fascinating. I personally have had a few aha moments when listening to you. So that's great. Thank you for joining us today, and our apologies a bit for the connection problems. We're now going to have a 10-minute break, time for you to absorb what we've just heard and perhaps even share some of your own aha moments on social media using the hashtag 2021TEF. The next session starts at 10:40 and we'll be discussing the new flexible working environment we've been catapulted into thanks to COVID-19. And so we will see you here for that. And with that, I now close this session.